Hey everybody, today Rahdo runs through his top 10 heaviest games. Right, this is going to be a tricky one. I have no idea why the voters demanded this particular topic so much. I guess for whatever reason they just really wanted to see just how dim-witted Jen and I are, because I'm now going to spend the next, half hour talking about how these games just put our brains through the ringer, how they absolutely cause us to have mental meltdowns sitting at the table. And I'm going to try and describe why, and also why we still love these games so much in spite of the fact that they really do our heads in. Also, I should say before I get going, an interesting element about the heaviness of a game. To my way of thinking, there's really two ways you can define, two things that can cause a game to be particularly heavy. One is depth, which is what Jen and I appreciate. Every one of these games we're about to talk about is a very deep and rich experience, and that's really where the heaviness of the game comes in. These games are so deep; they give you so much to think about, so many permutations and avenues for exploration and options and ways to plan and mitigate and all that. They give you so much. They are so deep that they are our 10 heaviest games. Now, there's another way you can make a game really, really heavy, and that's instead of going for depth, go for complexity. And you see a lot of games out there like that. Heck, we own a few, like Stronghold and Middle-earth Quest. I mean, those are heavy, heavy games, but not because they're super deep. I mean, often the decisions you make in those games are pretty straightforward. They're heavy more because there's just so much going on, so many boxes to tick, so many little persnickety rules you have to remember. Right, remember, under these circumstances, this is how this unit works, but under these circumstances, the rules completely change. And if you combine these two, and all that. I have to admit, Jen and I, we're generally not huge fans of complexity in our board games. We like our games to be smooth and streamlined and elegant and simple, and less about just tons of Byzantine complex rules. So, these 10 games I'm looking at right here, which I'm about to start talking about, these all make it onto the list because of the depth that they bring. And that's where the high weight of these games comes in, right? Okay, just wanted to mention that. And basically, we will be going from lightest of these 10 to heaviest. So the number one is going to be the absolute heaviest game that we own. Although the number 10 is going to be a pretty gosh darn heavy game too, right? Well, let's, without further ado, get straight to it. The number 10 game, Agricola. Now, this is weird. Actually, it's almost kind of hard for me to put this on the list. My gut reaction was to not include it because Jen and I, we have played Agricola so much now. We've played it over 30 times, and we're really very comfortable with it. We know our way around it really well. And so my gut feeling was, well, it's not that heavy. It's not that hard. But that's not true. This is an incredibly rich, deep game. And the depth of the game for us comes not from the worker placement mechanisms, which are pretty straightforward when it boils right down to it. This is not the greatest worker placement game on the market. It's just kind of a bog standard worker placement game. The worker placement is okay. It's solid. What makes this game deep and therefore heavy is the fact that every time we're going to play this game, well, Jen's laughing. She knows what I'm going to say. We deal out the cards. And you're supposed to deal out 14, but we actually follow one of the variants in the book, and we deal out 20 and then remove some so we can create like a really strong hand. I end up probably spending a good 10 minutes thinking about my cards. Jen probably is more like 20 or 30 minutes. Just sitting down with a hand of cards, and the depth of Agricola comes from having to plan out pretty much your entire game before the first worker is ever placed. Because these cards you have, these occupations and these minor improvement cards, define what you're going to be good at, how you are going to try to achieve victory, what your early game, your middle game, and your end game are going to look like. And you have to come up with a plan, a very rich plan that deals with all sorts of cause and effect change, that deals with fallback plans in case what you need doesn't really come through. It's an incredibly rich and exciting thing that we love doing. It's our favorite thing about Agricola. The game is almost kind of an afterthought. Okay, right, now we got to play the game and see how our plan works out. But what we really love more than anything else is getting that big monster hand of cards and then just noodling and noodling and noodling on it, coming up with the perfect plan. And every time you play, this game has so many cards. Even if you ignore all the expansions, just the base game has so many cards. Every time you play, you're going to get a different, exciting hand of possibilities. And that's why we love Agricola so much. And why, in spite of the fact that we've played it so many times, it still surprises us. Every time we sit down and play the game, we're still like, oh my God, what are we going to do with these? How are we going to make this work? So it still puts us through our paces every time we play, and that's why it's our number 10 game, Agricola. Now, our number 9 on the heaviest games of all time is a game that probably a lot of you haven't seen. By the way, I should mention, every single one of these games, all 10 of these games, I have done run-throughs for. And if you want to go see more about any of the games, you can hit the little eye, just hover your mouse over the screen, and you can hit the little eye, and there will be a link to every run-through I've done for all these games. So you can learn more about them as you go. But number 9 is Clinic. Now, this might be, I actually thought about not putting it on this list because it's kind of almost cruel for me to list it because this is a hard game to get. It had a very, very tiny print run last year at Essen 2014, but of only 200 copies. I have to admit, I have no idea if there are plans for a future print run or whatever it might be, but my gosh, we really like this game a lot. It is a lot of fun, and if you are looking for a heavy Euro style, building game, you really might want to seek this out if you can find somebody who is maybe willing to part with theirs. Or maybe, pester the designer, Alban Viard, and find out if he's ever going to do another print run of this. I really think you should put this on Kickstarter and really blow it out and make a really big deluxe version of it and stuff like that. But that's beside the point. I'm just here to talk about our number 9 heaviest game, Clinic. And wow, this game is crazy heavy. Now, first of all, obviously, if you couldn't tell from the cover and the title, this is basically Sim Hospital, the board game, because players are building competing hospitals or clinics to service various patients that are coming in as a constant, non-stop wave, round after round after round. More patients are building up, desperate for our services. And we are actually, while we are building our clinic, literally from the ground floor up, and the building in this game is very interesting because we can build a complex that spreads out over, kind of like, an entire complex. We could have this big complex, or we can build skyward. Instead of spreading out, we can spread up, floor after floor after floor. Although there are a lot of very specific rules about how you can do that, how you can't put a new floor until the foundation is down below and stuff like that. And as we're building our clinics, we're trying to build it with an eye towards the patients that we need to serve, and also the doctors that are just now coming out of university that we can hire. And it's an incredibly complex simulation of all these different elements that are going on. As people get more and more sick, they need better and better doctors, which means they need more and more training out of university. But if you don't have good enough doctors, you can hire more nurses to pick up the slack. There are special rooms you can build that give you all kinds of special abilities. And in addition to all of the other logistic stuff you have to bear in mind, you have this complex. Parking, of all things, comes into play because the more employees you have, the more space gets gobbled up by cars. The more patients you have, the more space gets gobbled up by cars, so the harder it is to build your clinic so that you can treat all these people. And then another really, probably the thing that makes the game interesting more than anything else, the crux of the whole game is at the end of every round, after you have successfully treated X number of patients and you make your income, you make $8 here, $12 there, $16 there. At the end of the round, that is the only opportunity you have to buy advertising so that your clinic can become the most popular one in town. That's what victory points are in this game, becoming the most popular clinic around. So at the end of every round, you can convert money you've made into points. But the tricky thing is, you can only convert money into points, into advertising, into victory points, at the moment you get it. So what you have is at the end of every round is, right, okay, I just made, 22 bucks. Okay, well, I could just convert it all into points and that'll be huge. But then I'll have no money on hand for next turn to continue to expand my clinic, to continue to pay the salaries of my employees. So you have this very, very tough planning decision. How much of my money, how much of my income do I just throw away for short-term gain, victory points, as opposed to hold on to for long-term strategic building opportunities? That one simple little twist, that if you hold on to the money and put it in the bank, you can't use it for advertising anymore. From the rest of the game, that money can only be used for salaries and expanding your operations and stuff like that. Becomes an incredibly challenging decision you have to make round after round after round, while also dealing with all the other stuff. Because, and again, I can't stress enough how interesting the logistical elements are of building vertically. That you can expand outwards or upwards. Upwards, of course, is really, really valuable because it saves more room for parking for all the cars on all the streets. But outwards is just a lot easier to do, and it gives you a lot more flexibility with how you expand. And then I'm just scratching the surface. There is so much that goes on in this game. It is an incredibly rich and deep experience that just makes Jen grind, but in a good way. When we played in the past, and I know Jen's just got her head down and she is just thinking. I'm like, honey, are you okay? Is this too much? Is it pushing you? And she says, no, this is the perfect amount of grind. We absolutely love Clinic. Our number 9. Now moving on to our number 8. And this one might be surprising for some folks. This is my only Stefan Feld game on this list in the Year of the Dragon. And people say, what? In the Year of the Dragon? Come on, that's like a midweight Feld. Where's your Bora Boras? Where's your Lunas? Where's your Aquaspheres? Where's your Trajans? Those are the really heavy, complex, what do you call them, Feld games. And now it's interesting. I completely agree with that. In the Year of the Dragon is a much simpler and more elegant design than some of Feld's more recent games. A Bora Bora and Trajan, and the other ones, those are definitely games that are much more complex than in the Year of the Dragon. But remember, I said right up front, Jen and we don't respond as much to complexity as we do as depth, and I would definitely say in the Year of the Dragon provides more depth than pretty much any other Stefan Feld game. It is probably his deepest game. And the reason for that is because of the fundamental structure of this game where right at the get-go, it's very much like Agricola. At the beginning of Agricola, you get your hand of cards and you pretty much have to plan out your entire game before, like I said, but before your first move is made. You have to come up with this really strong plan and then you see it through. This game does kind of the same thing, but in a very different way, because at the beginning of the game, you get to see laid out in front of you the Year of the Dragon. The next 12 months, the next 12 rounds of this game are going to be very, very difficult for China, and you are trying to help shepherd China through this year of famine and drought and pestilence and war. Every month, you can see all the months. So you know what? In October, that's going to be a year where everybody's starving, and then in November, that's going to be a year where everybody's being killed in a war. And you have to come up with you have to plan so far ahead, and you have to make really, really smart decisions to address your short-term needs. Right now, we've got this problem we got to solve today or tomorrow. But we also are having to, every step of the way, not only plan for today and tomorrow, but plan for the end of the game, right from the beginning of the game. And you do that with some rules that are really, really simple and streamlined and elegant that have to do with hiring various and sundry people who can help you meet the needs of your province of China. It's a brilliant game. It's incredibly deep. Now, I should say it's incredibly punishing. And this game can really beat you up badly. If you fail to plan very early, if you're not planning 6 months ahead, then when those 6 months come, you are going to get trashed and you are going to lose a lot of points, and it is not going to be pretty, and the game is going to show you no mercy. And that's where the depth comes from. When we're playing this game, the mechanisms themselves are really dead simple. Much simpler than Trajan with its Moncala or Macau with its Windrose and stuff like that. Very simple mechanisms, but the strategy that goes into planning for all these eventualities that you can see is so much more rich and deep and fulfilling. And I'm the biggest Feld fanboy in the universe, don't get me wrong. I mean, In the Year of a Dragon is not our favorite Feld game, but it is definitely, in our opinion, the heaviest one because you feel that pressure so much. You're having to make plans. You're basically a disaster contingency planning specialist in this game. And you know if you on this round don't plan correctly, people are going to die, and it's going to be brutal. And so that puts a lot of pressure on you, and you really feel that. And that's where the depth of In the Year of the Dragon comes in for us. It's why it is our number 7th heaviest game. But now let's move on to number 6. The first game on the list from designer Vital Lacerda, Kanban, which is a game that came out last year, 2014, and this is an excellent, really rich and heavy business simulation all about working in a car, in an automobile company. You are a junior executive working, and you basically have your finger in a lot of pies in this game. This game certainly wins the ribbon for most complex board. And you might look at this board and say, "Oh my God, what are you talking about, Rahdo? You said right up front you don't like complex games. Look how complex this is. This is insane." The interesting thing about Kanban is the core game in this is incredibly simple, is incredibly elegant. This is a worker placement game where you have one worker. And every turn, you're just going to put your one worker, which represents you, a junior executive at this automobile company, in a different, in a different department, whether it's the design department or the logistics department or the manufacturing department or the test and R&D department. You're basically just going to go work in one department, do a couple of quick actions, and then move on. And every few rounds, there's going to be a meeting where you have to basically go and you can see, in this meeting room, here's the 4 objectives that all players are trying to compete on to prove that they have done the best in, improving the quality of our engines or improving the quality of our brakes or, developing more SUVs or whatever it might be, whatever, the objectives are. Everybody can see. And we're just doing very simple worker placement actions to try to achieve these goals before the meeting comes. But we also have secret goals, which is another thing we're shooting for. And the interesting thing, the thing that really makes this game interesting is every step of the way, I'm placing my worker, Jen is placing her workers, and there's a third worker controlled by the game. That is Sandra, our manager, who is moving around from space to space. And whenever she comes into the same, whenever she moves to a new, area, a new department, she evaluates us. So we are constantly, through very simple worker placement mechanisms, probably one of the simplest worker placement games we own, because you just have one worker. I mean, it just couldn't get simpler. The core basic mechanisms of this game. But every worker placement is so rife with decision making and not complexity, but depth of your decision making, because it affects so many things. It affects the meeting you're building towards. It affects your own secret objectives that only you know about. It affects your standing with Sandra, your manager, so that you can make sure she doesn't get mad at you and give you demerits. Or there's so much going on with this game. It is so rich and so deep. And while at first glance it looks ridiculously huge and complex, it's not. It's really very simple and streamlined and elegant. And that's why we loved it. I mean, it's incredibly heavy. The decisions you make are so interwoven with each other, and and can be very, very tense. It is a very, very heavy game, but a very simple game, and it's absolutely excellent. Number 6, Kanban. Now on to number 5. Martin Wallace joins the ranks with brass. Oh boy, this one is, it's just going to get heavier and heavier. I don't need to keep reminding ourselves how heavy this one is. I'm just going to repeat myself over again. This game, crazy heavy. Heavier, heaviest. I mean, they're all getting heavy, so I don't need to keep repeating myself. But this game is basically set in the, the industrial age, the birth of the Industrial Revolution in England, and players are, industrial barons trying to, build up industry, making cotton and coal and iron, and shipping it in the early game, in the first half of the game, all around England via canals, building canals so we can ship our goods all over the place so we can score victory points, either sending it to the foreign market or getting stuff from the foreign market to help us build factories so we can convert stuff. It's a very prototypical, or not prototypical, it's a very, what's the word? But its core, it's a very, I can't think of the word, stupid live videos. But anyway, it's a brilliant design, and it's at its heart, it's really simple, because every turn you have a handful of cards that define where in England you can work, whether you can work over in this region or this region or this region, and every turn you're just going to play a card, and that determines, well, what am I going to build over here, over here, over here, and over the course of the game, with the very tight restriction of what your cards allow you to do, you're going to build up this infrastructure of manufacturing and transportation. A lot of the transportation you do in this game of moving stuff from one place to another might not be on your own transportation you set up, but using your opponent's transportation. So you're very, very locked in with what they're doing as well. And then the interesting thing is, halfway through the game, there's a huge shift where we jump from one era to the next. We jump from the era of canals to the era of rail, when suddenly all the canals we built in the early game pretty much literally get removed from the board because they no longer count. They don't carry enough goods, and then we have to pretty much almost start all over from scratch, building up successful rail lines so we can move even more product all around the country. And it's a really rich game, and it's interesting. A lot of people say the first half of the game, which the era of canals, is almost just like an extended setup, because the real game happens in the second half once you're working with rails. And the fact that you're already in the first half of the game in this really deep, mind-bendingly complex simulation with so many parameters and so many consequences to every choice you make, and then halfway through the game, you know what? If that was enough, let's just ratchet it to 11. Let's have everything you've done now become obsolete, and then you start building over from scratch. The first half of the game, you're building knowing that's going to happen, trying to put yourself in a good position. So for the second half of the game, you'll really be able to excel. And like any Martin Wallace game, this it's a very, very strong, smart, heavy financial, economic simulation with the value of goods that you're producing going up and down all the time, taking out loans that will cripple you later on if you don't use those loans smartly to build a better infrastructure. It's just really smart. And particularly impressive how heavy it is, how deep it is, in spite of the fact that its core, like Kanban before it, is so simple, is so clean and elegant. Just a handful of cards that tell you what you can do and you do them. Amazing game. Probably Martin Wallace's masterpiece, in our opinion. Brass. Okay, moving on to number, let's see, that was number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Yes, brass was number 6. Moving on to number 5. And now this one, I probably wavered more about putting this on the list as one of our heaviest games than any other. And I'll say why. That Alchemist is really, we're kind of on the fence about it. Now physically, it's an incredibly heavy box. I mean, there's so much stuff in here. This box is chock full of cardboard. And, again, like all the other ones, you can see my run through just by, hitting the little interactive eye up in the top, the top right corner of the screen, up there, I think, right up there. But this game, I'm not going to spend any time talking about what some people consider the gimmick, the fact that to be able to play this game, you need to have a digital device because you are an alchemist trying to basically use the scientific method to discover, the chemical components of different different items so that you can make really cool potions and become the greatest alchemist in town. That's really in a core what we're doing. But the interesting thing about this game is there's two halves to it. There is a worker placement game that is pretty straightforward. It works really well, but, and has some nice, interesting little twists. Again, you can see my run through to learn more, but it's pretty straightforward. The other half of the game is a very rich and deep deduction game, where every turn you are taking the components you have collected, eye of toad and wing of raven or claw. There's a lot of different elements, and doing experiments with them, and then using a digital device like an iPhone or a Google phone, or just using your own laptop, using a laptop to actually say, right, these are the things I want to experiment with. Tell me what it is I've discovered, and it will give you a tiny bit of information about the components that you've been experimenting with, but you'll never get a full and complete view of what the results are from your experiments. So you have to do multiple experiments over multiple turns with different types of components to try and start to deduce exactly what the chemical composition of all these components are. And for me and Jen, I gotta tell you, this game, more than any other game on this list, twists our brain in a really unique way. I mean, we've only played the game 4 times now, and we are still learning learning the secrets of how to do, how to do this deduction. It's an incredibly rich, incredibly deep game. And the reason I said I was hesitant is because I've read now on a few places, some people say, well, you know what? Once you do understand how deduction works, the game becomes super easy and it's nothing more than just an elaborate worker placement game. Now, maybe that's true. Maybe Jen and I are just epically dumb because we are still having a hard time coming to terms with how best to do these experiments, how to take the results from our experiments and use them to figure out what the results actually mean. I mean, for us, it feels so thematic. We really feel like we are researchers in this fantasy world doing actual scientific study. I mean, the game is incredibly thematic that way, and we are still, I guess, early on learning how best to play it. Now, the worker placement game is really nice too. It's maybe a little bit more aggressive than we would like. I mean, it can be very, very cutthroat. But the weight of this game comes from the deduction, this is by far the most complex deduction game there is on the market, and in large part because it requires an app. It's an incredible game. I mean, we respect it greatly, and it really does our head in. The last time we played, Jen almost had a breakdown because, she got herself so worked up. She wasn't really quite sure what her findings were. Nothing seemed to be adding up, and it was just like, it was just driving her nuts. So, I mean, for us anyway, maybe others would disagree, and Alchemists is a piece of cake, but for us, my gosh, it really does us in. But there's more ahead. Let's move on to number 4, our 4th heaviest game. Sorry, I got a little something in my throat here. I should not have eaten those pistachios before I started filming. Yikes. All right, let's move on to number 4, ZhanGuo. Oh, wow. Remember how on number 10, Agricola, I was talking about how at the beginning of Agricola, you get your hand of cards and you have to study those cards and come up with a plan that will carry you through the entire game. ZhanGuo does that to you over and over and over again. At the beginning of every round, you get a handful of cards that represent various important people in basically the setting of the game is ancient China in the process of being reunified, and we are chancellors who are tasked with trying to to basically take all these former warring states who have all been brought together under Ying Zheng, the emperor who unified China. And so all these different districts and whatnot, they hate each other, and it's our job to make sure they all have a common language, a common currency, and not surprisingly, that causes no end of strife. And we're constantly having to balance making forward steps to please the emperor because he wants this unification to go through. That's what we're trying to do, while also trying to keep the people of the land satisfied, or at least keep them under control so they won't full on riot. And to do that, we have, every round we get a bunch of cards that represent different, people from high society and low society and we can use these cards, we can deploy them in various places on the boards to give ourselves benefits to work towards our goal. And the interesting thing is, at the beginning of a round, when you get all these cards, you pretty much have to take these, it's 6 cards, and figure out what your entire round is going to be right at the get-go. Because the order you play these cards and the locations you play these cards creates an evolving chain of cause and effect. If I play this guy down over here to this province and this guy down over here to this province, then that means that for my third action, I could play this lady over here to the palace, and he would activate these 2 down in this province, and that would be a really great chain. But the problem is, every one of these characters has a number, and when you play them, if you play a number that is, higher. If I've recently played a number 40, if you then come along and play a card with a higher value, a 42 or a 67, not only will you get to do what you want to do with that card, but you'll get to do a bonus as well. But the problem is, you want to play that 46, but I might have played an 82. And so suddenly, if you play your 46 now, you won't get the bonus. So in addition to just trying to figure out your own perfect plan of this is the order I'm going to play these cards, and it's going to, it's going to explode with like combinatorial goodness. It's just going to be a fantastic round. Except all of a sudden, you can't get the bonuses you were expecting because inadvertently, I didn't even mean to, by playing my cards, I messed it up. So, not only do you have to build a plan for what you've got, but when you're looking across the table at my cards, you can see the backs of my cards. And you can tell that, oh wow, he's got 3 high-value cards and 2 low-value cards and 1 mid-value card. And I know I want to play this mid-value card. So, I need to make sure I play this before he plays any of his high-value cards. Will I be able to do that? How far do you push your luck while still, I mean, it's a brilliant game. There's so much going on, and I'm barely scratching the surface, because in addition to that, the meeting the needs of the people in all the different provinces, meeting the requirements of the emperor, because he sets out some very strict goals of what he wants to see so you can score victory points, while always playing this hand of cards. And every round you get this new hand of cards that becomes this new puzzle to solve. This game is incredibly deep. It is incredibly rich. So much is woven into that decision. Like I said, it's like Agricola times, what is it? Is there 5 rounds or 6? I forget how many rounds you play over the course of the game. But it's like you have to do that starting setup of Agricola 6 times or 5 times. And so that's why it's so high. It really... This one is borderline almost too heavy for Gen, because those decks of cards, and you can use those cards in so many ways, in so many different combinations. You have so many deep and meaningful choices to grind through as you're figuring out what is the best way to play these cards. It's incredible. It's an amazing design. Wonderful, wonderful thing. And also incredibly heavy. While still, at its core, being a really, much like all these other games, the thing I love about them is they're incredibly heavy. They're incredibly brain-burny, but the mechanisms themselves are so simple and so elegant. And ZhanGuo typifies that. It's a wonderful, wonderful game. That was our number 4 heaviest game. Now let's move on to even heavier realms. Number 3, Athlas Duel for Divinity. And actually, I'm going to be putting a run-through up for this pretty soon, probably this week. So you'll be able to, by the time you watch this video, there might not be a run-through for this yet, but it will be up very, very soon. So watch for that. If you subscribe to my YouTube channel, you'll know when it comes up. This game... Wow. Remember, I just said that this one is almost a bit too much for Jen. You know, Jen and I, we've played this now 4 times. The last time we played, after it was over, Jen said, oh my God, I am so exhausted, mentally exhausted. This game was so intellectually stimulating and intellectually challenging. I got to go take a nap. It might be too much for me. Because this is interesting. This is one of the very, very few tactical skirmish war battle games that Jen and I have ever played that we liked. It's very, very rare. I mean, we like this, we like Battlelore, we like Hellas, we like Tashkalar. There's very, very few. We've tried a bunch of them, we almost never like them. This one we like a lot. In fact, we think it's a brilliant design, but oh my gosh, so heavy. Why so heavy, you ask? Particularly since maybe you can't actually watch my run-through for it yet. Well, this game has 2 halves. In this game, we are dueling, godlings. We're basically trying to vie for our right to ascend to the pantheon of Attilians, and we do that by defeating each other in battle. But of course, we don't battle ourselves. We summon, various warriors and whatnot to do battle on the surface of Athlas, this magical floating planet. And you can see what the board looks like. It's kind of hex-based combat. There's different types of terrain. And it's basically a capture the flag. The first player who has a unit who holds on to 2 of the relics wins the game. And the second half of the game, which is the tactical maneuvering, getting your flying creatures out who can move twice as fast but who can't carry the relics, but can rush up to the front line and lay down suppressing fire so your slower land units can move up and grab the relics. But oh, what do you know? Your opponent has actually mind-controlled your guys, so your guys fight each other, and meanwhile, they bring up the undead who, when they explode, actually do damage to everybody else, but they can heal, and there's a ton of depth and variety. And we love the tactical skirmish in this game, primarily more than anything else because there's no dice. Everything in this game, all the battling is deterministic. It almost feels very, very much like a deep hex, grid-based version of Magic the Gathering. It really reminds us of playing Magic back in the day, because you get into these situations where, okay, I've got my guys deployed, you got your guys deployed. Each one of them is very, very unique. They have all kinds of special powers if they're going to attack or they're going to defend. defend, and every turn is like a puzzle trying to figure out, right, what is the best way, how can I use my forces to defeat you, bearing in mind you've got all these special powers, you've got other special powers in your hand that you may or may not use if you can play the cards and stuff like that. This game basically, it takes all the depth and complexity of Magic, streamlines it, because there aren't 1.5 billion rules and exceptions and all that. It's a very clean, simple, pure and elegant combat system, but with all the depth of Magic the Gathering, and puts it actually on a tactical skirmish base. So that's actually very, very cool, and it works really, really well. But that's not the reason we love it. That's the second half of the game. The reason we love it is the first half of the game, where you, as a god, actually design these warriors from scratch. Everybody gets a deck of, I don't even know how many cards is it, what is that? Like 80 cards, 80-some cards that we use to, and combine to build our perfect warriors. And again, in my run-through, I actually demonstrate how all this works, but it's a very rich and deep process. Again, to liken it to Magic the Gathering, it's like deck building in Magic the Gathering. You could spend hour upon hour, trying to come up with the perfect combination of cards in your deck so that it will follow a particular theme and work particularly well against particular, but it has certain weaknesses that you have to protect from. In Athlas, you do that 3 times over, because instead of building one deck with a bunch of combinations, you build 3 specific units by combining all these weapons and special unique abilities and armor and spells, and so you can create really rich, interesting, detailed, and I was going to say complex characters that, again, have really strong strengths and weaknesses that support each other. And once you have spent the first half of your game coming up with this menagerie of characters that is unique to you with so much, and again, it's a wonderful, brilliant, creative exercise to come up with these 3 special units you're going to lead into battle, then you can't wait to find out, well, how will these guys actually do when you put them out on the field and do battle in this capture the flag exercise. And the other interesting thing, too, is because we're a god, we're not done. Once we've actually created our special warrior races and we send them out there to try and fight, we also have godly powers, divine intervention cards they're called, and that's another part of setup. As part of setup, we make our special characters, and the more powerful we make them, the more they cost to summon, the more expensive they are, so the fewer of them we can do. That kind of stuff balances really, really nicely. But also as part of setup, we decide what will our powers be in this game. You can choose anywhere from like 3 to 5 divine interventions that can be like, giving somebody temporary invulnerability, or, stopping the event clock, all kinds of big game-changing effects. But not only do you have to decide what are your special powers going to be, but you have to decide the order you will get to play them in. And so, in a small way, it harkens back to that Agricola notion that before the game ever starts, before we ever put any units on the board who are going to fight, we have already had to come up with our grandmaster plan that we are going to try to pursue. Because I might decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to put a couple of cards at the top of my divine intervention deck that will let me speed up so I can rush out into the middle of the board and grab and then hold. Because maybe I'm going to create an undead army that if I can get them to the middle and then I can just have them spawn, because the undead have the power of respawning on top of each other, and just creating more and more. I might start out with that, and then midway through the game, I'm actually going to try and flood the area because I've also got these merfolk I'm going to use. And so you have to come up with a battle plan for the entire game, and you have to stick to it, because once you have made your divine intervention deck, this is the first card I play, the second, the third, the fourth, and then the fifth, you have to play them in that order. And so you're stuck with those decisions. And let me tell you, guaranteed, halfway through the battle, you're going to wish, oh my God, I wish I could get that lightning bolt, but it's 2 cards down. I've got these other cards in between, and my whole plan is falling apart because, of course, the best laid plans of mice and men, It's a brilliant game, really, really sharp. And I gotta say, it's saying a lot that Jen and I enjoy this as much as we do. But the combination of trying to create, because it's a very deep and intricate activity to create these 3 characters and balance them out. But then, again, like Agricola, making that battle plan that you have to stick throughout the entire game. And then once the combat itself starts, it is so deep and rich, because combat is not decided by dice rolls. It is decided by smart tactical maneuvering, because I can see, well, okay, I really want to move up on there, but I can see my opponent has archers up on the hill and they're within range, and I know how much damage they're going to do. It's just a really deep, rich, exciting game. We enjoy it a lot. but it's almost borderline too heavy for us. I think we need to play it a little bit more before we can make a final determination. But it's interesting. The more we play this game, the deeper it becomes, the heavier it becomes. Unlike some of these games where the more we play it, the better we get at it, it seems like it becomes easier and we can work our way through it better. This game, the more we play it, the richer and tougher it becomes because we start seeing more combinations, more interesting opportunities for moves and counter moves. And it's well, like I said, it's so heavy, Jen had to take a nap, if that tells you anything. And Jen's a smart cookie. Okay, we're down to the final two, and I'm at 39 minutes. Oh my gosh, I've been talking a lot. Let's try and go. Number 2, second heaviest game we own. Vito Losardo returns with his masterpiece, Vinhos. Actually, I misspeak. Honestly, for my money, CO2 is his masterpiece. And one of the main reasons, CO2 is our favorite game of Vital's is because it is a bit lighter. It's more medium weight, where most of his games, like Kanban, which I already talked about, and Vinhos, Vito Losardo, I don't know what's with his brain, he makes these incredibly rich, deep, intricate. Now, I'm not going to say complex, because I already talked about what I mean by complexity up front. A lot of really Byzantine rules, and it's very, very difficult to keep track of how everything works, and you're constantly having to double and triple check the rule book. That's complexity in board games. Jen, I don't like that. Vital's games are not complex, they're intricate. They have 1.5 million moving pieces. This game, which is where players are running rival what do you call them? Wine manufacturing. We're basically running vineyards and trying to make the best wine and the most renowned wine in the world by impressing judges at wine fairs, while also dealing with bank, making investments, saving, expanding our operations, doing all kinds of stuff, all based off this simple little worker placement grid here in the center of the board. The core of this game, like Kanban before it, is incredibly simple, but every move you make is so rich with consequence because you're trying to achieve, with the very few moves you get to make in this game, you're trying to achieve so much. You have all these different areas you're trying to excel at, and you can only do certain ones, and some of them are going to fall to the wayside, but it all comes out in the pudding, comes out at these occasional wine tasting shows that you're always trying to get the best wine in position so you can score the most points based on whatever the wine experts of the day think are the most important qualities in wine. Of course, their opinions change all the time. Maybe you even change their opinions a little bit over the course of the game. It's, like I said, it's rich, it's incredibly clean and simple and elegant. All you're doing every turn is just picking your little guy and moving from one space to another and then just doing whatever that action is. But the consequences of your actions are so meaningful. That's what makes Vinhos an incredibly the heaviest business simulation we own. And it's absolutely fantastic. Again, you can check the eye up in the corner to see the run through. But now, finally, our most heavy game, the game that does us in, again, it's one that's almost maybe borderline a little bit too heavy, but we respect it and love it so much we're holding on to it anyway, and that is Madeira, which is a game where we are administrators in the new Portuguese colony of Madeira, this island out in the Atlantic, out west of Portugal, trying to build up an infrastructure of this colony. And like Vital's games, all this is not from Vito Losardo, but I wouldn't blame you for thinking it was, an incredibly rich, intricate board with 1.5 million things you can do. But at its core, like these other games I've talked about, the core gameplay here is really simple. It's a worker placement game where every turn, every round, you roll some dice, and the higher numbers you roll, the better. They represent your influence that you can exert against all these different personages, the governor and the general and the warden and all that stuff. And so you basically exert your influence with these guys to get favors from them so that you can build up your industry, whether that is getting in good with the guilds of the city or making more production of various resources out in the fields or building up a naval fleet and shipping your goods all over the world to great acclaim because Madeira wine is known the world over and very, very loved. So you're doing very simple worker placement to run a very incredibly rich and intricate enterprise. And again, I don't say complex, because complexity has a certain meaning, because all of the choices you make in this game are really simple. They're all very intuitive. Once you know the basics of this game, you don't have to constantly go back and check the rules over and over again, because the core rules are clean and elegant. The thing I love most about Madeira is that simple worker placement at active, rolling your die and then where you're going to put it, is very, very interesting, because placing a worker on one of these guys, placing it on the governor, has two potential benefits. You get a benefit when you first place your worker there, but then later on in the round, there's a potential second benefit you could get, but only if you pay the guy. Because if I go to the governor and I need him to do me a favor, he says, yeah, that's fine. You're going to have to pay me at the end of the month. And if you do pay me, I'll give you this other benefit as well. So, I put my works out, I do all the benefits, I build up my industry and stuff like that, and then comes the end of the round, the end of the month. And all of the people that I, had dealings with early in the month, they kept, payment, please, pay me. And money is so tight in this game, you will never have enough money to pay everybody. So you have to strategically decide who are you going to pay and who you're not going to pay. And that creates a really interesting circumstance, because if I don't pay my bill with the mayor, as an example, I won't get his special extra benefit. But what that means is anybody else who went to the mayor, their bill suddenly increases. Because since I welched on my payment, everybody else has to pick up the slack. And there's this really incredibly intricate interplay between players. Because, the more players who go to a given guy, because we're all paying him for his services, the cheaper, the less money we all have to pay. But then if somebody fails to pay, suddenly everybody else has to pick up the slack if they want to pay. Now, of course, there's a downside. If you don't pay, you basically get kind of corruption points that can really kind of hamper you, but then you can bribe the local law enforcement to make all those goes away. So it's an incredibly interesting and deep worker placement game, because there's this really interesting interplay between players. But that's only half of it. The other thing that makes this game so heavy is, like a lot of these games, ZhanGuo and Kanban, you early on, you get special goals that are unique to you. Right, this is my goal. I want to build a lot of ships and get them overseas. I want to get really strong with this particular city. I want to have this much production. You have certain goals that the King of Portugal has set out for you. And early in the game, that's easy peasy, no problem. Oh, okay, this is what I need to do. All right, well, I'll take steps to do it. But the first time you have to meet your goals, you just have to meet one. The second time it comes back to have to achieve your goals, you have to complete 2. The third time, and near the end of the game, you have to complete 3. And so the game, over the course of the game, becomes more complex. Or again, I say complex, I don't mean it, but it becomes a tougher problem to solve. Because early in the game, okay, I'm just having to achieve this one thing. But by the end of the game, I'm having to achieve 3 things, and they might be wildly different. And if I fail, that's not going to be very good for me. The king's not going to be happy. The situation over the course of the game becomes deeper and richer and heavier and tougher to solve. And you just go deeper and deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole while dealing with all these really clever, intricate worker placement games. And it's just absolutely amazing. This game is crazy heavy, super duper heavy, absolutely wonderful. You can check the eye and see my run through to see it firsthand if you like. And that was it, folks. That looks like 50 minutes of talking about the 10 heaviest games we own. There's a lot of other heavy games. Jen and I, for the most part, we really love kind of medium to heavyweights. All of these, and as the farther they go, the less and less we play them, because Madeira and Vinhos and Athlas and ZhanGuo and Alchemists and Brass, really, those top 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, start to get so heavy that we rarely find ourselves with enough mental acuity, enough mental bandwidth free in our heads to be able to sit down and play them, because we know they're going to put us through the ringer so much. And as a general rule, we generally tend towards more kind of a medium weight. But these are all fantastic games. They are all so incredibly well designed, incredibly rich and elegant in their design, and yet through very simple game mechanisms create such incredibly deep, intricate, brain-burning scenarios. We just stand in awe. And that's it, folks. That was my top 10 heavy games. That was heavy lifting just talking about all that stuff. But again, if you'd like to know more, once again, there's a link to all of them up there. You just hit the little eye, and you can watch videos. And otherwise, that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.